We are going through the story of Jesus, and we are at the part where Jesus is tempted by the devil in the wilderness. And the story of Jesus being tempted by the devil is the story of someone saying no to something that everyone else has said yes to. The story of Jesus being tempted by the devil in the desert is the story of someone saying no to someone everyone else has said yes to. The devil fooled Adam, and since then, the devil has fooled everyone else except for Jesus Christ. The devil fooled everyone else, but the devil could not fool Jesus. The devil could not fool someone who had a heart from heaven. And to understand the importance of what happened, we have to look at a particular story in the Bible. In the book of Exodus, after God led his people out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, out of the land of misery, God led his people in the wilderness to humble them and to test them, to see what was in their hearts. God wanted to see what was in the hearts of his people. God wanted to see whether his people would seek him with all their heart. A child of God resembles their Father in heaven. Remember that. A child of God resembles their Father in heaven. A child of God recognizes their Father in heaven. A child of God resembles their Father in heaven. So God, our Father in heaven, he wanted to see our heart. He wanted to see the hearts of his people. He wanted to see whether the desires of their heart resembled the desires of his heart. God wanted to see whether his people desired to be children of God. God wanted to see whether his people desired to resemble their Father in heaven by seeking him with all their heart. Their Father in heaven who took care of them, who brought them out of Egypt, out of the land of misery. God wanted to see whether his people would recognize him as their Father who had taken care of them, who had brought them out of misery, who was bringing them into a good land. God wanted to see their hearts. God wanted to see whether his people would seek him with all their heart, so that the desires of their heart resembled the desires of God's heart. But tragically, God's people were led astray. Instead of following the desires of God's heart, God's people followed the sinful desires of their own heart. God's people followed the sinful desires of their own heart, just like Adam. So in the wilderness, God's people failed to resemble their Father in heaven. And now we're in the New Testament. And in the wilderness is Jesus Christ. And time again, Jesus would succeed where God's people failed. We needed someone to come from heaven to show us how to live. We needed someone to come from heaven to show us how to live lives that pleased our Father in heaven. While Jesus was on earth, he had a human body, but he had a heart from heaven. And because Jesus had a heart from heaven, because his heart was closest to God's heart, his heart perfectly resembled God's heart. His heart from heaven had no desire for anything the devil was offering him. Here is something really important to understand. Every temptation from the devil is rooted in the desire to play God. Every temptation from the devil is rooted in the desire to play the part of God. The lies of the devil are designed to feed the desire to play God, to control our life, as though we're in control of our life, instead of trust and control to the one who created life. Satan wants us to turn away from God by fooling us into thinking that we can play the part of God. Satan wants us to turn away from God. Satan wants us to have no relationship with God by fooling us into thinking, by deluding us into thinking that we can play the part of God. The devil wants to delude us into thinking that we can play the part of God in our lives. The devil wants to delude us into thinking that we find satisfaction by playing the part of God. But Jesus, the one and only Son of God, the one who perfectly resembled our Father in heaven, the only one who came from heaven, he knew that you only find satisfaction by playing the part of a child of God. You only find complete satisfaction by completely trusting God as your Father in heaven. You only find complete satisfaction by trusting God as your Father in heaven. Jesus, the one and only Son of, and Jesus, the one and only Son of God, the only one who came from heaven. He was the only one who perfectly understood this with his mind, heart, and soul. He had a human body. But he had a heart from heaven. And he knew the desires of his heart would only fully find satisfaction, would only find satisfaction by fulfilling the desires of God's heart. The devil does not want you to pursue the desires of God's heart. The devil wants you to pursue the selfish desires of your heart. The devil wants you to live for yourself and please yourself. And when you're living to please only you, it's a lonely place to be. With this first temptation, the devil is trying to tempt Jesus to play the part of God. And Jesus makes it clear. He will not find satisfaction by trying to play God. He makes it clear he will find satisfaction by following God, by living for God's purposes, by listening to God, by listening to every word that comes from the mouth of God, so that he can live for God's purposes. By listening to every word that comes from the mouth of God, he can live every part of his life for God's purposes. And that's how his heart and soul will find satisfaction. Not by trying to play God, not by trying to do things his own way, not by trying to please himself, but by recognizing his Father in heaven loves him and will take care of him. He knows that God knows the pleasures his heart desires, and he is willing to listen to every word that comes from the mouth of God, so that he can follow God, so that he can follow God's words and live every part of his life for God's purposes. And Jesus knows that by living every part of your life for God's purposes, by living completely for God's purposes, you will find complete satisfaction. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.